Good morning, everyone. Let's give it 1 more minute and then we kick it off. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. If not, then feel free to give a ping in the chat. And I think it's about time to get started. So I'm René. As you can see me twice on the screen and once with the caption. I'm the founder and CEO of Lepaya, but actually started Lepaya from your side of the table. I was leading HR for a large and scaling company in Southeast Asia, where we had some massive business challenges, which were very practically related to getting the productivity per FTE up and retaining our core talent. And I started to experiment a lot with L&D upskilling strategies to impact those challenges. Did that in-house, struggled to find solutions I wanted to find in the market, and based on that, made sure that I started Lepaya to make sure that other companies could potentially benefit as well from our solutions. Been doing that for 8 years, and that's about as far as our sales pitch will go, because I want to talk with you about resilience in the age of AI. And why? Just to make a very quick bridge, even though because you're here, you probably do want to talk about it already. Everyone wants to adopt AI, and 92% of the companies are driving investment on this topic. 1% of the companies, however, still claim to have achieved maturity on this topic. And frankly speaking, I think that 1% is not being truly honest. But at least HBR is saying that only 5% of the Gen AI transformations have paid off. And if I'm being super honest, that's still an optimistic number, because I think about 1.7 trillion as of the latest number has been spent on AI so far. And the only ones who are actually really making money of it are the chip manufacturers themselves. But that's about to change. And how, that's what I want to talk with you today about. And let me start that by asking a very simple question. What is your view on what resilience does mean in this day and age? Not looking for complex definitions, but just your view of what it would mean. Just drop something in the chat if you have any sense or idea. Yeah, exactly. Always be learning, accepting the unknown, dealing with change, learning curiosity. Sophie, I think indeed technical definition, being able to bounce back in difficult situations, adapting. Fully agree. So if you go to the linguistic side of things, it says a clear Latin base. Re means again, salire means to jump. So it's really about the official definition is just jumping back after a big shift or a big change. And I think that's what we have been good at. If you look at the kind of past 30 years, there have been a lot of crises, a lot of kind of big events, whether that was the dot-com crisis or the great financial crisis, where in both cases, up to 15% of the workforce lost their jobs in kind of an 18 to 24 month window, and companies had to adjust massively from really scaling back their investment, let's say in internet banking or in online shopping or great financial crisis. Money suddenly became very expensive. A lot of business cases didn't hold anymore, and companies really fundamentally needed to readjust what they're spending time on. We have been overall pretty good, at least if you look at it economically, to make sure that our organizations, our people, our teams bounced back from that and got to higher output, higher productivity afterwards. And of course, I think a great example is COVID. Already 5 years ago that it started. Feels like yesterday, but basically overnight around the world, we fundamentally changed how people worked, how they interacted with their colleagues, how they interacted with their peers, how they interacted with their clients, and changed kind of the whole work life from an in-office together in-person kind of setup to a almost fully remote setup for which we're still benefiting today. We're agile, we're pretty fast, and we bounced back after kind of a major setback. Now, if I kind of put on the same slide some of the big kind of technology transformations we've seen over that same period, adoption has typically been a lot slower. Whether it was mobile devices or whether it was big data that can fundamentally transform and is fundamentally transforming the way we work, the way we make decisions, the way we focus on our clients, it has typically taken much longer to embrace some of those changes. And very often it actually was an external crisis that ensured that the large investments that were required for these kind of topics were being made. And that's also my point on AI. I think we all know that it's coming. That's what we saw on the previous slide. We don't know where it's going yet, but we do know it's going to have a major impact. So why not start planning today to not just wait for something to hit us and then we find potentially with AI a way to bounce back, but how can we use those same skills, which we have, which company has, and which our people actually have shown in the past time and time again, to bounce forward, take the leap forward, and make the changes that will drive our productivity, our output, and ultimately also their workforce happiness. So my proposal is to redefine resilience a little bit in the age of AI, and do that actually based on the American Psychological Association, where resilience is defined as the process and outcome of successfully adapting to difficult or challenging experiences, especially to mental, emotional, and behavioral flexibility. In simple terms, if we think that AI, and I certainly do think so, will fundamentally redefine how we work and how we interact, then let's show resilience up front and make sure we're going to kind of embrace this and take that leap into the future to get ready for that future. Organizations are already taking some big steps. Some of them are very high over. Showing that the other way around, so I'll start there, which is Accenture. They have invested or claim to invest up to $1 billion to really redefine their workforce, which was a couple of pillars, but fundamentally, and I'll talk about it in a second, investing in those people and those skills, which they felt would drive their competitive edge and their client impact over the next couple of years, but also fundamentally saying goodbye to a lot of people who they felt couldn't be upskilled. The workforce needs new skills to use AI, is what Julie said, and we have to make the tough decisions today. If I bring it closer to home, it's a client I've worked with a lot. It's the Rabobank, one of the largest agricultural banks. They've been working hard to fight economic crime over the past couple of years, and they've really seen a transition in that. From kind of 10 years ago, manual track of transactions, and the people needed technical and hard skills in compliance analysis, in data-driven, in assessing the data and getting clarity there, to today, AI-assisted screening, where the humans in those teams really focus on the complex cases and, of course, make sure that the AI acts ethically and the alerts are well integrated. And now they're working on kind of really moving this over the next couple of years into the future with fully automated risk detection, where the teams working on this really focus on client relationships, continuing to build trust, and making sure that while we fight things like economic crime and do KYC, the actual commercial relationship with these clients is not hurt. I think a brilliant example of where AI came in, it really also changed the role of the humans, and ultimately it's one of those organizations where there was a real business case around that, because they scaled up to 7,000 people in this department and are able to really scale it back aggressively based on the use of technology. So that's some organizations out there, but if we really started from the first slide, 92% of the organizations want to invest, but many don't know where to start. Well, let's talk a little bit about that, and let's talk a little bit about where we want to start. And I like this quote by Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, which is really about AI, not about replacing humans. Of course, it will replace certain functions, but it's augmenting human capabilities. Overall, with productivity crunch in the Western world, we need migration to make sure that our jobs are being filled on a political level. Not diving into that, but of course, in many of our countries, migration is something which is being reduced. meaning that ultimately, if you want to get productivity up and the next generation to be better off than we are, that we need to make sure that we find ways that, well, the human output gets increased, and that's something that AI can do, and that's also, from my perspective, how we shoot at AI. Not about replacement, about augmenting and delivering more value. And then, if you take that forward, it was an easy statement to make. There's probably 3 critical questions we need to ask ourselves. The first one is, what is actually changing? Then the second is, okay, who should take the lead? And the third one is, how can you prepare for the change? If I dive into the first one, what is changing? For me, it's about the statement at the top. AI is raising the floor. AI can do things which it couldn't do a year ago, 6 months ago, or 2 years ago. Data analytics and reporting, complex, adaptive algorithmic tasks, communication workflows. It's actually helping at large airlines which are scaling to really do the automated and complex rebookings where we needed the humans for. That AI is going to do, but ultimately that's going to be doing for a whole industry, and that means it's going to be hard to be competitive based on that alone. And that's for me where the second part comes in, which is about the humans raising the ceiling. We humans need to make sure that we make ethical judgments. AI spits out output. Sometimes it's correct, sometimes not correct. But of course, there's also the layer of it being appropriate, or is it the output we want it to be? Are the conclusions ethical? Are the trade-offs between different stakeholders and different kind of value propositions made correctly? And is the decision-making purely logical? Even with AI, it sometimes isn't, but even if it's logical, of course, there is the work environment isn't only about pure logic. It's also about doing the right things for the clients, for your teams, and for your shareholders, and making the trade-offs among them. So that are skills we really we need the humans for, and that can build on output of intelligence. If adaptive tasks get reduced, we can make sure that based on these tasks, there is better output. The stakeholder management we need to do, the contextualization we need to do, and ultimately, what I think is ultimately changing, it is we really go from a world in which humans do work and there's automation that helps them, that we look into a world where there's hybrid intelligence, where AI and human intelligence combined can come up with a lot more value and a lot more output for ultimately for our clients. Then who should lead it? Well, this is a study by HBR from actually last month. So what has made AI adoption successful at companies which have gone in that direction yet? And I find the interesting thing that if you add it up, there's almost 60%, which is about the organizational culture or the HR teams and the leadership teams. I'll let it sink in for a second, because I think a lot of kind of thinking today is still about the models and the security and how can we deploy it at scale and what can the tech team do. But the companies that say, hey, we have actually made an AI adoption in our core process, in our primary processes in a successful way, they point to leadership and they point to the people teams to have driven that transformation. And of course, there were other teams needed for that, but those are not the ones that ultimately moved the needle most, or at least towards 60%. Why is that? Well, if I look at Just Borsin, I think you all know him. Basically, what he's claiming at, and I think we conceptually agree with all of that, but I just sometimes like his graphs. The pace of the technology, the green line, is accelerating. A traditional manager can only translate that into output at a certain space, meaning the gap between the productivity that a new technology could achieve and the gap and the productivity actually increase is widening. And what he calls super managers, and openers, I don't like that term so much, but they're able to make sure that what tech can do and what we can then combine with the human intelligence that I was talking about is accelerating. And that's ultimately leading to more output, where managers go from supervising to actually driving innovation. Excuse me. Who then should lead that? And I think I'm getting there by default already, is, from my perspective, that's the CHRO and their core HR teams. Why? If I look at an organization, very structurally, the CEO is responsible for strategy, for vision, for direction, for competitive positioning, all these kind of things. Finance put the financial resource allocation underneath that and make sure it drives returns. And the CHRO, the people teams, they put the human resource allocation underneath that and drive productivity. And then, of course, you have the business teams that drive the sales, marketing, operations, and the corporate functions that make sure we do that in a consistent, scalable, secure, compliant way. The examples I've shown, let's say whether it's Rabobank or Accenture or the last slide, who made that successful, leadership, organizational culture, it is really a change in how people are doing their work and who is better suited than a CHRO to drive that transformation. Full stop. Then, if we talk about the what, it is about the leadership behaviors. So we've established that leadership has a major impact, that the CHRO should drive it, and then the question becomes, well, what are the most important things? And I think in the upper left corner is a skill that is definitely not an easy one to capture for most leaders. And a note, when I say leader, I'm definitely not talking C-level necessarily, but a lot of mid-level leaders as well. It's curiosity and experimentation. So how do you make sure that people are just not churning and churning kind of in their daily task and dealing with complexity and with challenges, but have the mindset and ability to lead that innovation, ask questions, where are we going, but also how can we make the team more effective in going there, and allow for targeted and small experiments to drive that process. Human empathy, so really understanding each other better, understanding our clients, understanding our stakeholders, what do they need, but also what is AI doing to them, is extremely important. So how do we build those skills in our leadership levels? Vision and planning is important there, because I think the one thing we need to be honest about is that most large-scale AI adoptions, especially in primary processes, cost a lot of money, come with risk, and have a level of uncertainty. So making sure that what you do in that experimentation really goes into the direction of where the company is going, and that's really cascaded down through the organization. So every, at least significant experiment, is in line with that and tied to the ultimate vision is extremely important. And then obviously business results. There's many things that can be improved, but what is really moving the needle, what is really driving results, and if you really talk about the augmentation part that I touched upon earlier, what are the business results, what is setting you apart from your competition, and how can you make sure that AI plus the human intelligence that we need to boost is making the dent into your results and your bottom line or your top line or whatever you're competing on with your competition. I think these are the AI critical leadership behaviors, but I added here HR behaviors or HR leadership behaviors as well, because this is what we as HR leaders also need to challenge our full organization on, not just in the HR column, but as HR business partners, as overall kind of business partners, we need to make sure that we have this mindset to make sure that we have the right conversations with our business counterparts and with our stakeholders, and make sure that we point them in the right direction. That when we discuss productivity, it's not about, okay, where do we make sure that we implement AI to reduce people and drive down costs? No, what is our vision? Where do we make the difference? What are the results we want to achieve? Where can we experiment in a way that's making our competitive edge come out faster and sooner? And how do we do that with a lot of human empathy? Because not everyone can be upskilled. Not everyone wants to be upskilled or is able to upskill at a sufficiently high speed. Some jobs will disappear. So how can we have these conversations for ourselves, but with our stakeholders as well? And I think it's once more an example where HR and business strategy are perfectly well aligned. For the teams themselves, question I often get, not much is changing. So for the ones who don't recognize these statements, these are the top 5 skills from the World Economic Forum 2025, i.e. the skills we should focus on. So for our teams and the professionals that make up the body of your workforce, it is really about analytical thinking, AI and data literacy. In simple terms, how do you work with data? How do you work with complex decision making? How do you work with trade-offs? And which becomes even more important in the age of AI, to make sure that you make the trade-offs well and deal with the hallucination and deal with kind of the ethical trade-offs that are there. Creative thinking is there. No experimentation, no progress without it. Leadership have touched upon long and hard, and resilience is something I've hoped to be able to redefine with you. Let's not sit back. Let's not see what other players do. Let's definitely not wait until the next financial crisis, which is going to hits us. But let's see if with AI we can preempt at least one of them and jump rapidly and fast into the future. So, which steps can you take today towards an AI resilient workforce, or maybe tomorrow if you're going to spend most of the day in some of these sessions? I think the most important one is demystify the transformation. AI is not that complex tech thing where we need to involve a lot of tech and security task forces to drive it. It's about, hey, what are some of the things that the people that really are the most valuable ones for our transformation, for our strategy and our impact? What's the work where they're doing, and how can AI supercharge them? How can they augment AI to make that impact bigger? Let's start having that conversation. Let's use simple words to say, hey, what tech can help them to have them do their work better, and start talking about that with the business leaders. Let's translate that into the people strategy for 2026. Many of you will be in teams where the strategy for 26 is now being cooked up, and where there's also HR business partners going into the organization, or on top level, HR needs to come up with their strategy. Let's have this as top-down strategy, which is not just about co-pilots or making sure that people adopt AI in their kind of non-core processes, transcribing meetings or doing other things. It's really about what are the elements of the organization that we want to experiment with AI with from a core process point of view. Let's write it down and let's make that part of the organization. And even if that's tough, and we can spend time on that in a different session to demystify that part a little bit, it's about reviewing the skills investment agenda. Because I think the skills that are needed on leadership level, the skills that are needed on professional level to thrive in the AI age are pretty clear. And that's what, in any case, we need to make sure that we're all focusing on in upskilling and reskilling our teams. Because if we don't do it, then our competition will. That's overall what I wanted to share with you. I'll end again with a little bit of a marketing slide, because if you struggle how to do it in reality, well, Lepaya really strives and exists to make learning impact, which we do by linking your business strategy to your workforce needs. Also in the age of AI, we close the skills gap and scale that around the globe. So we are more than happy to help you with that. And there's a QR code that can assist you if you want to find more information. But I'll pause there and see if there's any questions posed in the Q&A section. I don't know where the Q&A section is. What skills are becoming more important in the organization for AI, and are you seeing changes? Thanks, Greg, for posting the question. I think what's important, so I think I've talked a little bit about the leadership skills that are indeed becoming more important, and the professional skills that are becoming more important. And as per your second question, I think this is not a stable answer. We are in a very early stage of the transition. We are really trying to, I think AI today is in its infancy, and only in 10 or 5 to 10 years, we'll kind of see what a more advanced or mature version could look like. And I think the skills we're advocating today are the more logical ones based on that augmentation scenario or direction that we are exploring. But I think we need to keep a very close eye on them and see if new skills evolved. But we also need to kind of make sure that you step back from the noise. 18 months ago, I think there were a lot of questions, for instance, about prompting training and prompting skills. And I think you have learned since then that AI itself can really help us with prompting. Simple questions like, how can we improve this prompt? How can I work with you better? We don't need to train people on, because AI can already help them with us. So very practically, let's focus on really those skills that augment the impact from a human point of view. And let's continue to keep an eye on that, but not be kind of waved by noise. What key metrics should we monitor to know if upskilling programs are effective? I think if I look at this very holistically, I think key metrics are really ultimately about, are we moving the needle on the behavioral side of things? So if I link this, I can talk about upskilling in kind of a very broad context for a long time. We'll not do that, since I think I'm getting a ping that we're nearing the end of the session. But upskilling for me should be directly tied to behavioral change. You invest in upskilling because you want people to display or show new skills, and you can measure kind of behavioral change. And that is what we should do and how we should work with it. And I think notably for AI, you should ultimately look at the business impact. So you make the cases, you make the business case, and you basically say, hey, if we invest in upgrading skills here and in the joint tech, are we indeed accelerating the output there? Whether that's, if you look at customer service side, not necessarily just lower cost, but it's actually first time right or customer satisfaction. I was working with a large engineering company which really struggled with a lack of kind of highly skilled talent for kind of certain engineering projects, and they wanted to make sure that we were not just driving costs down of back office, but that actually those highly skilled individuals would spend less time on checking and double checking and recalculating output from their teams, or kind of in doing calculations for themselves. And they built really AI in their kind of core software platform that we're using for a long time, to make sure that the direct output that they're charging their clients for would be that the engineers which spend time on that could spend more time in really solving the more complex and typically therefore ambiguous kind of client needs, versus doing the more manual work to get to that and make sure they're future proofed. So ultimately for me, it's about, let's try to find the real business impact, and underneath that, because we're experimenting and we're checking, let's really make sure that at least the skills and the behaviors that we're focusing on are moving. Thank you. Then I want to thank you for all of your attention. If there's further questions, then of course, more than happy to answer them. And if not, you're more than welcome to scan the QR code and find even a bit more information. But more importantly, I hope we'll start to embrace AI and the transformation of that in our core processes, because that's what our teams deserve, our organizations need, but ultimately what society needs for our next generations to be better off than we are. Thank you and have a lovely day.